So recently, Wizards of the Coast announced a new starter set for the 2024 edition of Dungeons and Dragons. I think I watched, yeah, it was a Bob the World Builder video that I watched about it, and I agree with most of the points in that the idea that the adventure is set in such a way that when you reach certain points, someone else now becomes a dungeon master, and the previous dungeon master becomes a player. So it teaches each individual to run the game, much like Matt Colville's video series was meant to do. And it did. He created a lot of dungeon masters, but we still have very few dungeon masters relative to the number of players, and people are always saying, I can't find a game. And they, for whatever reason, don't want to run a game. Because if you run a game, it's pretty easy to find players as long as, you're running a game that they want to play. And this starter set, if you have been thinking about running a game, or you can't find a game to play because you're a player and you can't find a dungeon master, it would be great to get this starter set and also to watch Matt Colville's series on YouTube. I think it's interesting that they put out this product, and that I don't think they have put out a product like this before, with this mindset of, making sure that everyone that plays this starter set gets at least one moment to feel what it's like to be a dungeon master, so that they can decide later on whether they want to do that. And I think just being a dungeon master once kind of solidifies it for you that you do want to be a dungeon master and not just a player. Being a player is great because there's very little commitment to that, and the spotlight is on you and your fellow players, and the dungeon master is just facilitating that. And it seems, from a player perspective, that it's not fun to be a dungeon master because they're not the one having fun. But you would be surprised at how much fun it is to facilitate other people's moments to shine, and also to creatively design a story based on actions that you can't predict. And I think that this starter set will help get people into that mindset, hopefully. And I wonder what is coming next for Dungeons and Dragons, because I don't think there's really been any announcements. We've got the 3 core books. The Player's Guide came out, and then the Dungeon Master's Guide came out sometime around Christmas, and recently the Monster Manual came out. I did some reviews of them on this channel, and you can check them out. They're not deep reviews. I like to go through a book and just to sort of see what it's like, and my thoughts usually just compare it to other manuals that I've read over the years. It's mostly a first look, having not read the books at all. Just, how does this look as a manual for Dungeons & Dragons? Anyway, so it makes me think about what's coming in the rest of the year that hasn't been announced besides this starter set, which is pretty great. Are they going to do any campaign settings? Are we, do they update those, or do we just use the ones from the 5th edition? Are we gonna revisit Eberron? Are we gonna revisit Kryn? Are we gonna revisit Greyhawk? Oh wait, I think there was either a rumor, or I don't think there was an announcement that Greyhawk would be the campaign setting coming out soon. But that'd be great to revisit Greyhawk, and I would like a revisit of Kryn. I don't know if the Dragonlance book that they put out was necessarily what I was looking for. I would kind of like a Dragonlance one that covers the original War of the Lance, not necessarily what's happening now in whatever timeline they're in. I don't know whether it's 100 years or 200 years after the War of the Lance. I'd even want to look, a campaign setting that goes as far back as Ishtar or something like that. But if Greyhawk is coming, that's cool. We got lots of Forgotten Realms, but people do like Forgotten Realms, and it is the most popular of the settings. So there's no reason not to do a updated campaign setting. Maybe not focusing on Waterdeep or the Sword Coast or the things they've already covered. Maybe to like Shadowdale and stuff like that. Maybe cover that area, like the original books that came out before the Dresden books took off, like the stuff with Elminster and that kind of stuff. And then Eberron, I only know a little bit about Eberron. I listened to the podcast by the guy that created Eberron, and so I guess maybe I know more about Eberron than I think I do. But I would like to see more Eberron as updated to 2024. Just having more information is always better, and maybe create an entirely new campaign setting. Now I know, of course, they took some magic worlds and turned them into campaign settings like Strixhaven and Theros, but they didn't create a whole. Well, is it the Infinite Staircase? I don't think that's a campaign setting really. And is the library? Is that the same as the Infinite Staircase? I can't remember. The point is that I think they need to create a whole new campaign world and make that the default for 2024 Dungeons & Dragons. We've got lots of Forgotten Realms books. We've got lots of Eberron books. We used to have lots of Dragonlance books, but not so much anymore. And we haven't had Greyhawk books in a very, very long time. So yes, you should put out a Greyhawk one. And even was it Black? What's Dave Arneson's world? Blackthorn? No, not Blackthorn. Anyway, put out his setting too. But I think you need to innovate and make a whole new campaign world. And it doesn't. It could just be whatever the designers at Wizards of the Coast right now, how they feel about what they've learned about Krynn, about Eberron, and about Faerun, and how that fits within their Dungeons and Dragons, and create a world that is influenced by all of them, and maybe some other worlds that they think are cool. And just, I don't know, I'd like to see something new. And if it turns out not to be something that I'm interested in or like, then I won't buy it. But hopefully, if you put some effort into it and create a new world, maybe it'll be banger. But you'll never know unless you try. So, as for other books, let's see. We had Volo's Guide, which deep cut on monsters, and then there was a dragon book, and there was another book like Volo's Guide that also went deep cut on monsters. More books like that. Those are good. You've covered, I think, goblins and dragons and beholders and a bunch of other things, but maybe cover cultures and civilizations from creatures that aren't normally player characters, and maybe aren't the kind of creatures that are the most common to encounter, but are numerous enough to have their own civilizations. Or create some new monsters or some new races that have interesting, the origins or interesting cultures and that kind of stuff. A book like that would be good. Maybe an equipment book. I think an equipment book would be good. And, equipment and maybe magical items and artifacts, that kind of thing. That'd be an interesting book to have. A book of tables. I mean, that would be if you wanted a cash grab, that would be a cash grab that I don't think many people would necessarily complain about, because if they don't want a book of tables, they really don't have to buy a book of tables. But I think that having a concise tome where all the tables of all the random things that can happen, I think that there will be quite a few players out there. If you're one of those players that would want a book of tables from Dungeons & Dragons that was it $59.99, let me know, because I'm pretty sure I would buy a book of tables. What else would be a good book? Let's see. You got some monsters. equipment. You know, maybe a second player's guide for more classes and races to play. Maybe a second monster manual. I know that we didn't get that with 2014 D&D, but they did do it previously with other editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, second edition you just kept getting more and more monsters to put into a binder. I don't see why those wouldn't necessarily sell, and why I think people would probably want more core books. Maybe even a Dungeon Master's cookbook, something that is more specific to whatever the topic is that you want to get across with being a Dungeon Master. Because like Dungeon Master's guides tend to cover a bunch of topics, and here's how to do these things. But if you want a deep dive onto, world creation, a book on just world creation, and therefore, cultures, peoples, the gods, the creator gods, that kind of stuff, or a deep dive on encounters, just a book of how to run encounters, or a book on how how to string together stories and that kind of thing. That could be a trilogy of creating a world, running encounters, how to combine all that stuff. I don't know. That would be an interesting book to get. And hell, it doesn't even need to be, something like that doesn't even need to be made by Wizards of the Coast. So if someone watching this wants to make a book like that or do a Kickstarter of that, take the idea, run with it. I don't own it. And if you can get it out before Wizards of the Coast, you win. I think that, you could also do books that are just, a city adventure book. Because you did, adventures on like watery areas, basically. And you did another collection of heist ones, I think. But just a collection of adventures set in cities. And it could be a specific city, or it can be a generic adventure that could be plopped into any city, and a bunch of vignettes of those adventures, and then do the same thing for some other ecosystems, wintry adventures, or forest adventures, or the frontier. A book about the frontier would actually be pretty good too. I think that would go well. So I think those are some ideas for things that could be coming up. What I think Wizards of the Coast is going to put out, probably Greyhawk, probably some more, Forgotten Realms, Faerun, Sword Coasty things, Waterdeep probably, because Waterdeep is, a big seller, and something Drizzt related, hopefully, because people really like Drizzt. He's not necessarily my favorite character, but I understand how important he is to Dungeons and Dragons, and to the popularity of not just the Forgotten Realms, but also the whole system. Everybody knows who Drizzt is, and something involving Drizzt will be a seller. So I guess those are sort of my predictions, although the other things that I mentioned aren't really predictions. They're just sort of ideas that people could run with. But if there's something you're looking for in 2025 or 2026 for Dungeons & Dragons, let me know. If you've heard some rumors or if there's some announcements, let me know in the comments. And thanks a lot.